I'm Mary Kramer, President-elect, standing in for our President, Bill Lesh, who is out of the city. I'd like to welcome our radio audience, City Club members and their guests to the regular Friday meeting of the City Club of Portland. As is our custom, we will introduce our new members first. He's a former Portlander and a former member of this club, and now he's the managing editor of the Harvard Business Review. He'll speak on the dynamics of competition between the U.S. and Japan in a talk entitled, Competing in the 1990s, What We Need to Change. We will be meeting here in the Mayfair Room at the Benson Hotel. Now is the time for discussion, debate, and vote on a primary election vice president of the club and director of audits for the city of Portland. He'll have the privilege of asking the first question. After our speaker's remark, we do open up to questions from City Club members. We do give preference to those people who are brave enough to go to the microphone to ask their questions, but on your table there are blanks if you would like to submit a written question. Hold them up and staff members will pick them up and bring them to the podium. Now it's time for our program. Dateline 1980. Rhodesia wins independence from Great Britain and becomes Zimbabwe. Apartheid is abolished. Robert Mugabe is elected prime minister, and he establishes a multiracial, pluralistic government. In South Africa, Nelson Mandela has been imprisoned for 16 years. Dateline 1985. Zimbabwe moves toward improvements in education and health care. Agricultural improvements increase food production. Prime Minister Mugabe is re-elected in an election that sees a 95% turnout. Nelson Mandela refuses to bargain for freedom, and Ronald Reagan says, America's view of apartheid is simple and straightforward. We believe it's wrong, we condemn it, and we're united in hoping that the day will come when it will be no more. Dateline 1990. Zimbabwe has made tremendous gains and even exports food products, but the New York Times reports that the country's multi-party democracy is in jeopardy. Apathy and cynicism seem to be rising. Only 54% of eligible voters turn out to re-elect him. In South Africa, a freed Nelson Mandela meets with President de Klerk to work toward a new constitution that would share political power with the African National Congress. An echo of Stevie Wonder's words about apartheid to the United Nations comes faintly through the halls. The bell for freedom still rings, the hammer for justice still pounds. As long as there is light, there's still a day, and I know we can find our way. Today we hear from Ambassador Stanislaus Chigwedere, graduate of the University of Rhodesia, a former English teacher, Principal Private Secretary to the Prime Minister, High Commissioner to Canada, and now Zimbabwe's Ambassador to the United States. Zimbabwe has experience. Among others, Nelson Mandela believes South Africa can profit from that experience. Ambassador Chigwedere will tell us about their challenges. Please join me in welcoming the ambassador.
Madam Chairman, Mrs. Kramer, Mr. Richard Tracy, members of the City Club, friends, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for honoring me by inviting me to come and address you at this prestigious City Club of Portland. In fact, allow me, Madam Chairman, to express my sincere gratitude to all the people and organizations who have volunteered their time and resources to make this visit a success. Among these include USAMBA, the Northwest Strategies, the Oregon State Commission on Black Affairs, U.S. Bancorp, the World Trade Center, Swabi, Williamson and White, Pacific Development, plus all the other business people and community members who chipped in. All I can say is that this gives me a positive image of Portland and the ability of its citizens to work together for a common cause. About 2 weeks ago, on April 18th, Zimbabwe celebrated its 10th anniversary of independence. So many events have occurred around the world since Zimbabwe's birth in 1980. Perestroika and glasnost has warmed the world. We have seen detente and rapprochement between the superpowers. Democracy has changed the face of Eastern Europe. Namibia became independent on 21st March of this year and replaced Zimbabwe as Africa's youngest nation. Nelson Mandela and other political prisoners were released, and the President de Klerk of South Africa promised to end apartheid. Amid all these dazzling changes, Zimbabwe's story should not be forgotten. The story of forgiveness and reconciliation, harmonious racial and ethnic relations, peace and political stability, and pragmatic economic management. We built on the experience of other African countries which had gained their independence 20 years earlier, and we try to avoid some of the pitfalls that had fallen into. Soon after winning the general elections in 1980, President Mugabe, a man who had been incarcerated for over 10 years by the racist Rhodesian regime and was lost his only child whilst in detention, he called upon the nation to forgive each other of the past and to join hands to reconstruct and develop a new nation. Rhodesian Prime Minister Ian Smith, who many of our people would have liked to see tried for the war crimes that he had perpetrated, is a free man today in Zimbabwe who tills his farm and who moves freely around the country with no need for guards to protect him. He is even free in Zimbabwe and outside to continue preaching the failed racist ideas of his own regime, and to do that, the government of Zimbabwe gives him a generous pension. 2 guerrilla armies, one led by President Robert Mugabe and the other by Joshua Nkomo, were made with success with the Rhodesian Army to form the Zimbabwe National Army. To achieve this goal, we enlisted the help of the British Army, which up to this day continues to help train our own army. We have also had quite a number of officers training at the various military colleges throughout the width and breadth of your country. Although his party ZANU-PF won a landslide victory in 1980 general elections, President Mugabe invited the losers, including Joshua Nkomo of the opposition party and the Europeans, to join him in a government of national unity, thus espousing the policy of national reconciliation. The spirit of reconciliation and national unity and the practice of democracy have continued throughout Zimbabwe's first decade. The signing of a unity accord between ZANU-PF and the opposition of ZAPU brought to an end the armed dissidence that was wasting human lives in Matabeleland and destroying development projects in Zimbabwe's western provinces. The merger of these two parties did not, and I want to emphasize, create a one-party state, as some people in this country have alleged. In 1985, Zimbabwe held its first post-independence multi-party democratic general elections. At the end of March this year, Zimbabwe held its second multi-party democratic free and fair elections. 2 candidates ran for the presidency of the country of Zimbabwe, and 5 political parties contested the 119 parliamentary seats. And today, as we speak, Zimbabwe continues to be a democratic nation. In the recent elections concluded, 2 European reign, and 1 parliamentary seat in areas that are predominantly occupied by Africans. And when the president formed a new cabinet a month ago, he included another 3 Europeans. And this is a mosaic of the universe in the cabinet. In our cabinet, we can boast of being able to include all races. We have blacks in the cabinet, we have whites. We even have a Chinese minister in our cabinet. While fostering the spirit of reconciliation, Zimbabwe moved quickly to correct some of the imbalances created by the British and Rhodesian governments, imbalances which had forced people to take up arms. Education and health services were extended to include previously areas of neglect. Primary education has been made free and compulsory for all our children. Primary, the total school enrollments have been increased by 300% from 1979, from 800,000 students to 3.2 million students in 1989. Health services have been made free to the poor of the country. In addition to building over 210 rural health centers, the government has extended to all parts of the country its program of primary health care, which includes the training of thousands of village health workers and traditional midwives. To the potential investor, trader, and tourist, Zimbabwe offers a healthy and educated labor force, a unified nation enjoying peace, political stability, racial and ethnic harmony. Economically, Zimbabwe offers great potential for industrialization. It is indeed the most developed and the most prosperous country in sub-Saharan Africa. With a population of 9 million people and the size of California, with a gross national product of US $5 billion and a per capita income of US 620, Zimbabwe is classified by the World Bank as a lower middle income country. The country has a mixed economy in which the private sector plays a dominant role, contributing more than 70% to the GNP. Zimbabwe has a well-developed and diversified manufacturing sector, which contributes 25% to the GNP. The manufacturing sector is built of the country's rich and varied agricultural and mineral resources. The minerals that we produce include, among others, gold, platinum, chromium, iron ore, coal, nickel, copper, manganese, bauxite, and many others. Agriculture, which employs about 50% of the labor force, has as its major products cotton, corn, sugarcane, coffee, tea, tobacco, beef, dairy, and wines. And Zimbabwe can boast of being a net exporter of food, the only country in Africa that does not import food. The country has a well-developed financial sector and is capable of effectively mobilizing local resources for venture capital. The sector has 5 commercial banks, 4 discount banks, 3 building societies, 5 financial houses, and a development bank. And the country can boast of having a viable stock exchange, one of the very few in Africa. Zimbabwe has an extensive rail, road, and telecommunication system. Zimbabwe's achievement, since independence, has been in the field of agriculture. We were given national recognition in 1980 when our president won the Africa Prize for Leadership in Sustaining Hunger. And Zimbabwe goes in our food, not only to feed its people, it also exports food to other African and developing countries in the Middle East and to Nicaragua. The most notable achievement has been in the peasant sector, where the contribution to national agricultural production has increased from 10% in 1979 to 64% in 1988. Since 1980, Zimbabwe's economy has passed through 3 distinct phases: the lifting of sanctions, and high commodity prices on the market made the economy grow by 11% in the first 2 years after independence. An international recession and a drought in Zimbabwe caused the economy to decline and inflation to soar in the years 1982 to 1984. An international economic upturn in 1984, stable commodity prices, a good rainy season in Zimbabwe set the country once again on the path to recovery. In 1988 and 89, the economy grew in real terms by about 5%. The first 10 years of independence have enabled us to learn the weaknesses of the economy and to formulate appropriate corrective policies. We have been concerned by economic growth, its over dependence on agriculture, and the prices of raw commodities on the international scene. Our success in education has emptied thousands of school graduates onto the streets, leading to a high level of unemployment in the country. The government's determination to honor all its debt obligations, coupled with low commodity prices, led to a shortage of foreign exchange and a shortage of some industrial raw materials, machinery, and spare parts. The corrective measures we have taken include a new investment code, the lifting of the price freeze, the introduction of collective bargaining in determining wages, implementation of policies to reduce the budget deficit, and the formulation of trade liberalization measures. The new investment regulations of May 1989 created the Zimbabwe Investment Center, a one-stop center for the quick processing of investment proposals. The center directly approves any investment under Zimbabwean $5 million and responds to all proposals within 90 days. And since its formation in August of last year, the center has approved projects which are worth over 400 million Zimbabwean dollars. Recognizing the importance of guaranteeing and protecting investments, the government signed the World Bank's MIGA Convention and promised to negotiate other bilateral investment guarantee agreements. And because we are serious in our efforts to invite American investors, we should be signing within the next 2 weeks, if not sooner, the Overseas Private Investment Code, OPIC. Foreign companies coming to Zimbabwe will be allowed to remit up to 50% of their after-tax profits. In priority projects, however, remittability can go up to 100% after taxation. Zimbabwe will offer tax incentives which include 100% special initial allowance on plant, equipment, buildings, and duty-free to those investors coming to invest in high priority areas. The government is studying the experience of other developing countries which have expanded their export earnings through the establishment of export processing zones. The government has published an investment register which profiles areas which need investment. These are sectors which are productive, and they include the manufacturing sector, the agro-based industries, mining, transport, energy, telecommunications, and many other not mentioned here. Zimbabweans, we think that we need managerial skills so that we can process raw materials to enable us to export more value-added products. Priority projects include the establishment of a fertilizer, a pulp and paper, a cement, and the plastic resin plants, the construction of a new hydroelectric plant, the expansion of ethanol from sugar plant, and the establishment of telecommunication projects. These and many others can be invested in. Zimbabwe, therefore, is not an unknown environment to American investors. Since the independence, American firms like A.J. Heinz of Pittsburgh and Cummins Diesel of USA have invested in Zimbabwe. Mobil of this country is investing millions of dollars into the exploration of petroleum in the Zambezi Valley. From Britain, Clough Holdings has invested in the gold mining, and from Australia, the Daughter Group is investing in platinum mining. We have over 40 subsidiaries of US firms which have been operating in Zimbabwe before independence. They include Johnson & Johnson, Colgate-Palmolive, Union Carbide, and Eastman Kodak. Total US direct private investments are estimated at over US $200 million. As a matter of fact, the economic relations between Zimbabwe and USA are improving. Since the independence, Zimbabwe has received over US $400 million in bilateral aid from this government. Two-way trade between the two countries has risen from near zero in 1980 to over US $300 million a year today. Zimbabwe exports to this country products like ferrochromium, ferrosilicon, nickel, sugar, leather products, and textiles, whilst importing Boeing aircraft, mining, agricultural machinery, IBM, computers, and other engineering. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not possible for me to talk about Zimbabwe without touching on the situation in our region. Southern Africa, to which we belong, has experienced liberation wars in 5 of its different countries. For years, there has also been a target of the policy of stabilization by South Africa, which is aimed at preserving the system of apartheid. Southern Africa has also been a victim of superpower rivalry in Angola. The warming up of relations between the two superpowers has, to some degree, contributed towards the independence of Namibia and the release of Mandela. But, ladies and gentlemen, very little else has changed. As we watched on TV, on February 11th of this year, we saw Mandela regally walking out of a prison in the Cape Province, and there was euphoria throughout the whole world. We in Southern Africa were overjoyed at the release of Mandela, but we were not celebrating. Because for us, Mandela was being released from a small, crowded, dirty prison in Cape Province into a bigger prison in South Africa. Mandela still remains a prisoner in his own country, and nothing to that extent has changed. President de Klerk has promised to dismantle apartheid, but the laws that form the policies, the pillars of racial system, such as the Group Areas Act and the Land Act, are still intact and in place. The oppression and suffering of the black majority continues just as before. Therefore, this is not the time to relax the pressure on South Africa. The little reforms that de Klerk has made are the result of domestic and international pressure. And I want at this juncture to thank those of you here who have, in your own modest ways, made a contribution by making people become sensitized to the plight of our brothers in South Africa, by fighting towards the total dismantlement of apartheid. And it is that pressure that has made de Klerk made some of these concessions today. Economic sanctions, cultural boycotts, diplomatic and other forms of pressure should actually be intensified until the system of apartheid is dismantled and the empowerment of the people of South Africa is total and effective. Through our policies of racial and ethnic reconciliation in Zimbabwe, our policy of national unity, and our pragmatic approach to the economy, we in Zimbabwe have amply demonstrated that the European community in South Africa has absolutely nothing to fear from an African government should it take power in South Africa. We pose Zimbabwe as a role model where black and white can peacefully coexist, where black and white can become members of one society. And we think South Africa should follow our example. And we hope that with your support and your goodwill, enough pressure can be put on de Klerk to move towards an irreversible march to turn apartheid. And we demand the creation of a democratic, unitary, non-racial society in South Africa where all peoples are equal. The states of Mozambique and Angola continue to suffer from South Africa's destabilization. We have in Zimbabwe over 150,000 Mozambicans who are refugees who have fled from South African-sponsored Renamo bandits. We have had to send troops into Mozambique to protect our trade routes to the Mozambican seaports and to Malawi. It is a veritable human tragedy that hundreds of thousands of people have been killed and maimed in Mozambique and Angola, and billions of dollars in property destroyed. These two countries have never had a chance or the opportunity, since becoming independent, to develop their own country and to enjoy their own rich resources. Zimbabwe, therefore, as a country committed to peace and security, is involved in the search for peaceful resolutions to the conflicts in Mozambique and Angola. President Mugabe co-chairs the group that is arranging for peace talks in Mozambique, and is also part of a group of African presidents who are seeking to set up peace talks and a ceasefire in Angola. This for us is crucial and important. For those of you who may be potential investors in Zimbabwe, you should be encouraged by the fact that Zimbabwe has 9 million people, but that we are also a member of an organization called SADC with a market of 70 million people. This regional organization was established in 1980 to coordinate the development and to reduce dependence on South Africa. Namibia has already joined SADC, and we are already planning for the day when South Africa, independent and free, can qualify to join this organization. About a week ago, a group of South African business people were in Zimbabwe already exploring how they could participate in this organization once their country is, moved away, is liberated from apartheid. We have in Zimbabwe a young, vibrant country, a country that is richly endowed with flora and fauna, a country that has a beautiful climate, a country that has the biggest and most majestic waterfalls in the world, a country that has the regal and imposing Great Zimbabwe. And I say to you, our friends in Portland, come and see Zimbabwe. Come and be part and parcel of our experience. And that hopefully one day all of us here can, through Zimbabwe, go down and see our sisters and brothers in a free, united, democratic South Africa. I thank you.
Dick Tracy has the pleasure of the first question. Dick?
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for your inspiring talk. Ownership of Zimbabwe's rich commercial farmland reportedly remains in control of whites. What effect has this had on economic development of the country and on the black population? And it is likely to change.
Thank you for asking a very pertinent question. In actual fact, when we were campaigning for the elections in March, the major item on the ruling party's manifesto was the question of land, what we call land reform. I would not want to go into details to give you the history of how the land is very inequitably distributed in our country, but the 4,000 commercial farmers in Zimbabwe were mainly white, own more than 90% of the rich land that there is in the country. And the government indicated at the time of independence that they wanted to buy that land and be able to resettle and relocate the people who have been denied of the land. But because we had in place a constitution which had been drafted by the British in 1979 and imposed on us, we could not, according to that constitution, we could not buy the land, we could not buy the land we wanted. And the constitution that was in place has now come to an end, and we are now free to change the constitution as we want. And indeed, as I speak to you today, the news report I got this morning from Zimbabwe was that President Mugabe yesterday opened our parliament after the elections and is introducing a bill in parliament which is going to allow for an accelerated land reform program where the government will be able to buy rich land and be able to settle some of the people who are in land that is sandy and very infertile. But I want it to be very clear that the government of Zimbabwe respects the law of the country, and we are not going to take anybody's land. If we want the land, we'll buy the land and pay the land at market prices, which are agreed to by the seller and by the government. At the same time, too, Zimbabwe is proud of its record in agriculture production and will not want to buy the land and put our peasants, farmers in that rich land, which then will become idle. We are going to do it in a manner that is systematic, where the people who are being moved from poor, infertile soils are going to become more productive. So we want to build the necessary infrastructure, give them the necessary things that they need to use that land maximally to benefit the country. So it is a program that is well formulated, and for us it is crucial that we should move with speed to acquire more land to give to our people.
Jim. Ambassador, James Harris, City Club member. A little comparison between South Africa and Zimbabwe. What are the key differences existing in South Africa that would make its transition to a black or multiracial rule easier or harder than Zimbabwe's?
Okay, a good question. It's a good question. You're asking very good questions. I like this. The City Club is a good club. I should come here more often. I should come here more often. I enjoy this type of exchange of ideas.
Come back.
Indeed.
Come back next Friday.
Yes. There's something else on the program for which she announced.
You can be my guest.
Yes. Indeed, there are similarities between our two systems in the sense that the policy of discrimination, which was in our country, it was Rhodesia, was the same as apartheid. But even when it came to implementing that discrimination, the system in Rhodesia was never as severe as it is in South Africa. That's the first point. In Rhodesia, we never had a situation where we had Bantustans created. We had reserves, but they are not based along tribal groups. Because one of the major problems of in South Africa is that the people there have been so polarized, not only racially, but tribally. So to bring them together and to reintegrate them into one harmonious society is going to be a very, very difficult thing indeed in South Africa. It needs lots of imagination, lots of persuasion, lots of accommodation and compromise because of that racial polarization. Ours, I think, was less severe. And then secondly, as you know, in our country, the colonizers were forced to negotiate to end the fighting. They were not forced to come to the table because of sanctions and international pressure. It was because the war that we were waging for 13 years in Rhodesia had reached and had an impact on 90% of the country. And the guerrilla armies, led by Mugabe and Como, had virtually occupied 90% of the countryside in Rhodesia. And the government was losing the war. It had no option but to negotiate. In South Africa, it is different. It is different. There is much more pressure which has come from our side, than pressure coming from the liberation movement. And therefore, there's going to be, again, a greater need, greater creativity in making the leaders of the various groups come together and realize that they all belong to one country, that after all, they're all brothers and sisters. So the system in South Africa is much greater. The problem there is much more complex than our own situation was. And of course, South Africa is a much bigger country, and industrially, it is the most industrialized country, Sub-Saharan Africa. We are number 2, it is number 1. That also gives us greater leverage to try to stall things, to try to woo friends. That is why some of the American companies dilly-dallying, wavering on disinvesting from South Africa. They're benefiting from it, from being there. That is why Margaret Thatcher and the British government, are very, very reluctant to put effective sanctions on South Africa because they have massive investments in South Africa. Therefore, it has also support outside of itself, and that makes it much more difficult.
Dennis Cusack, City Club member. You mentioned a few minutes ago in your talk about the fact that that 10 years since independence had occurred has now ended. It's my understanding in an editorial or two that I've read recently that one of the agreements reached initially was that there had to be a multi-party political system. And now that that 10-year period has ended, that you are essentially free to change that. You commented that there are some misconceptions about that, yet what I have read is that there is a strong push by Mugabe to establish a one-party system. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, I can elaborate on that. There is no strong push by President Mugabe to put a one-party state in place. There is indeed a strong push from the people of Zimbabwe to have a one-party state, in the sense that according to politics in Africa and politics in Zimbabwe, multi-party democracies have tended to create more divisions because they tend to be based on tribal groupings rather than on ideological principles. And that has tended to create more confusion, more bickering. And indeed, in our own country, in 1981-82, there was also fighting in Zimbabwe because the opposition was fighting against the government, and it would not even allow the government to go and develop that part of the country because they said they were in opposition. And so when the people of Zimbabwe talk of one-party state, they are much more concerned about uniting the leadership so that they can focus their attention and their energies on development. Because when you look at a country like Zimbabwe, the political system that prevails today in Zimbabwe has only been in place for 10 years. And the transposition of political systems that have been placed in America for 200 years cannot necessarily be relevant or useful in a situation like that one. So we are trying to evolve our own system. We have not, the government of Zimbabwe has not introduced a bill to create a one-party state. There has been talk about it at the political meetings, but there has been no such bill. There has been no such debate at all which has taken place. And the president has said, if at all there will ever be a time to do that, it will be because the people of Zimbabwe, through a democratic referendum, will have so chosen. But the government cannot impose a political system on the people. We believe in democracy, and we cannot last in government if we impose our will on the people which they don't like. I think that's very, very clear. But there has been talk in the American media that Zimbabwe is a one-party state. We are not a one-party state. We're a multi-party democracy now, with many parties functioning and operating freely in the country.
Annette Farmer, City Club member. Mr. Ambassador, on April 18, there were 2 articles in our daily paper. One was by Coretta King, and the other reprint from the Christian Science Monitor, both on Zimbabwe. Now, I did cut them because I'm interested in Zimbabwe. I spent more than a month there 3 years ago, crisscrossed the country. And by the way, you have better organized and prettier animal preserves than in Kenya. But I talked to many of your people, both black and white, attended the parliament session, and was very impressed. Now, reading those articles, I'm inclined to agree with Coretta King, what she wrote. But the Christian Science Monitor article, in my opinion, is biased. And so I want to know, what do you do besides traveling and talking to groups and trying to make people understand the real situation? I also met the son of Ian Smith, who, by the way, Smith is still in the parliament, isn't it?
No, he's now retired.
Not anymore.
He's retired now, yes.
But his son is a friend of Mr. Mugabe and supports Mugabe. So tell us, what do you do when you read that type of biased articles, all because you are friends with some of the socialist countries? But my impression was that you have for a role model socialist countries like Sweden and Norway, the Scandinavian.
That is it.
So what's wrong with that? Thank you.
Indeed, I wish you could come and join my embassy. Because one of the problems that I face as ambassador is that the media, and the media is particularly in this country, is very biased, sometimes very ill-informed, sometimes deliberately misinformed, and sometimes it deliberately distorts things because they have their own ideological things that they want to project. And more often than not, if one was to judge a country like Zimbabwe by what you read in some of the media here, and if you were to go to Zimbabwe, you will not believe that you're in Zimbabwe, because the two pictures are so different from what you read in the media and what the reality is. It's one of the painful tasks of being an ambassador, in that we try to correct those distortions, we try to interact with the media, to give them information, relevant facts, and to us, we are very aware of mistakes that we made, as like any government, and problems that we have. But we are very concerned by the deliberate distortions that they give in the media. So it is a very, very difficult task for us, because the media is a very powerful vehicle here. And because people are so far away from Zimbabwe, all that they can do is to go by what they read in the media. I cannot be able to cover every state or every city in this country. And therefore, people can only go by what they read in the media, and more often than not, the media is giving wrong information about us. I mean, you talked about the son of Ian Smith. Now, Ian Smith is the person who arrested Robert Mugabe and put him in prison, for 10 years. His son is today working for the government. When I joined the Prime Minister's office as Prime Minister Mugabe's principal private secretary, the chief of the civil service in Zimbabwe was a white man called George Smith. This man had been the chief advisor and mentor of Ian Smith. He was the man who had signed the papers to have Robert Mugabe and Nkomo put in prison 10 years earlier. And for 2.5 years, Mugabe kept him as his principal advisor. Because he said, we are not fighting against whites, we are fighting against an evil system, not against the white people. And when you have such things, more often than not, it's so painful when you come out here and people give you so much criticism and completely ignore the good things that you've done. And we have said, many people have said, why do you keep Smith? Why do you pay such a handsome, a pension? He killed 60,000 people, died at his hands in our country. We keep him, he's safe, we pay him a pension every month. No one will say thank you. People look for little petty things to criticize. It's difficult for human beings to give you praise. It's much easier to criticize you. And those of us who are diplomats, we go double thick skin. That's the only way we survive. That's the only way we survive.
Pete Bear, City Club member. Mr. Ambassador, another question about South Africa, and specifically about the United States' role, in particular, whether or not the U.S. should be involved, or where the delineation is between assisting and interfering. Specifically, the question would be, how can the U.S. Accelerate the transition away from apartheid, and what, in your opinion, would distinguish between assistance and interference on the part of the United States?
If the U.S. government feels that they have a mandate and a legal right to go and invade Panama, because there's a dictator there who is corrupt, surely they have a much bigger right to go and be directly involved in stopping apartheid, which is killing people, thousands of people every day. Is it that the people who are dying in South Africa are black, therefore they're careless? These are questions that worry me. These are questions that we have so many double standards that we get. Different principles are used. I mean, you have a right to go and directly get involved in a small country in Central America, but where for over the last 50 years, the blacks are being killed every day by the government, we say, no, let's give the clerk a chance. Maybe you will change. Maybe you will reform. Evil is not reformable. Evil cannot be reformable. It can only be destroyed. You can't reform evil. And we therefore get very concerned by that. We will want to see America play a direct role. It's got lots of leverage. If America Britain and Japan use the economic leverage of South Africa, the South African government will be forced today to dismantle apartheid. They will have no option, because if they don't, the country will collapse. But because America is enjoying economic benefits from its involvement there, they are taking their time and dealing. And for us who live in that part of the world, where every day our sisters are dying. The day before I left for Portland, I read a report of a young Anglican priest from New Zealand who was coming to work in Zimbabwe as a missionary, and has been very vocal in denouncing apartheid in Harare, in our capital. And the South African government was very angry by his sermons. And they sent him a parcel from Johannesburg. He opened this parcel, stamped South Africa with some books, and he's opened this. A bomb blew him to pieces. We live with these things every day. For us, it's a matter of national survival. Our brothers are dying each and every day. And we think really that there is a much greater need for the American government to get involved in such a situation.
Jim Larpenter, member of the City Club. Your Excellency, can you define in terms of timelines what you see as the progress of South Africa becoming independent, the peoples of South Africa becoming independent, in comparison to what happened in your experience in Rhodesia? Timeline.
I've claimed to have some powers, but I never claimed to have prophetic powers. And this is one of the difficult questions. The timetable for the dismantlement of apartheid. As you might be aware of, the discussions between the government of South Africa and Mandela's team began 3 days ago. They've actually just ended, I think maybe a couple of hours ago. And these were preliminary talks about talks to try to iron out a few problems and obstacles in their way. The process of discussing and negotiating leading to a new political dispensation is going to be long. Long in the sense that the problems that the government is facing are many. The government is having to respond to the legitimate aspirations of the black people and other people who are deprived, to give them full rights. The government has to respond to the pressures that are coming from outside of South Africa to say that indeed the system of apartheid must go. At the same time, the government is having to look at its own supporters and the people that put it in power. And we have a very, very dangerous lunatic fringe in South Africa. I foresee a few more deaths and maybe much more bloodshed now, than in the last 18 months. But the lunatic white fringe there is a small group of people who are saying we should never allow ourselves to have the same rights as the blacks. They don't enjoy popular support, but because they're extremists, they can do all sorts of dangerous things. So the government has to respond to all those whims and to all those demands, which are not very easy to respond to. Yet at the same time too, it's not easy to negotiate yourself out of power. De Klerk is in power today. And for him to say, okay, Mandela, we give you this constitution, he can become president, that's not a very easy thing to do. They'll use all tricks, we'll use all stalling tactics, we'll use all diversionary tactics to try to get as much as they can out of these negotiations. It will be a prolonged process. But my guess, which is just a gut feeling, is that I don't see South Africa having the same constitution 4 years down the line. I don't see South Africa having another general election 4 years down the line under the same constitution. The path that de Klerk has opened, whether wittingly or unwittingly, is going to become irreversible to him. He may find himself overtaken by events and other pressures. The tide of freedom and democracy will sweep him without his realizing it. And our continuous support, in any way indeed, will help to make that tide become stronger and more powerful.
It It's time for us to adjourn. We want to thank our speaker for a wonderful speech today. Please join me in thanking. We are adjourned.